Research specialists in the field of aging have identified a form of mental exercise that can really reduce the risk of dementia. A peer-reviewed journal for the Alzheimer's Society, Alzheimer's Association, and Dementia published the study, which followed 2,800 seniors for 10 years to measure the impact of 3 different approaches to brain training on cognitive aging. Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Mahncke, CEO of Posit Science, joins me now from San Francisco to chat a little bit about the study. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Hal. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. So, Henry, can you maybe describe a little bit more about what happened with the study and the 3 types of approaches to brain training that were used to reduce the risk of dementia?
Sure. This is really a landmark study. And probably one of the most important things to understand about this was funded entirely independently here in the U.S. by the National Institutes of Health. And what they decided to ask more than 10 years ago was a fundamental question. Does engaging the brain, does training the brain in older people, does it help improve cognitive function? Does it help improve everyday life? And just now they've asked the question, does it help reduce the risk of dementia? And this study, you can think of this as a pivotal study, the same way that a new drug would come to market or a new medical device would come to market. And what the investigators did is they had 6 different clinical trial sites. So they were spread out to make sure they got a really representative group of people. They enrolled people who were over age 65 in the study, and they actually enrolled more than 2,800 of them. And they randomized them into 4 groups. One of them, as you mentioned, did memory training. You could sit in a classroom and learn like tips and tricks. Like if I wanted to remember your name was Hal, I might rhyme it with something, right?
So, or hallelujah,
or hallelujah. Hallelujah. See, that's a good mnemonic right there.
Yeah.
A second group did reasoning training, and this is like learning how to notice patterns. Like if you see 1, 3, 5, 7, you might guess the next number is 9 because they're all odds. And then the third group did this computerized form of brain training where they actually used a computer and trained their brain to make their visual system faster and more accurate, improve their visual speed and attention. And then the fourth group just did nothing, just like most of us do as we get old. And they were followed for more than 10 years. And what the new data has shown us is that the folks who used that computerized brain training program, the speed training program, made their brains faster and more accurate. They actually reduced their risk of going on to dementia by 29%, whereas the other group saw no such change.
Wow.
And the reason many people are so excited about this is it's really the first randomized controlled trial to show us that you can do something specifically to take your own brain health into your own hands and reduce the risk of going on to this dread condition.
So give us some perspective then. How big of a problem is dementia right now? How many people are impacted?
Oh, dementia is an enormous problem. It is, if you survey older people know it's the single most feared aspect of as we get older. People are more worried about dementia than they are about their finances. They're more worried about dementia than cancer, even more worried about dementia than losing a spouse. From a numbers perspective, in the U.S. here alone, there are well more than 5 million people affected by dementia, and those numbers are forecast to grow and grow over time. And if you look at the costs to healthcare systems of taking care of people who've gone to dementia, this becomes a $1 trillion problem. So it's an absolutely enormous issue. And the challenge here is that there's nothing until now that's been shown to affect this. If you follow the pharmaceutical industry news, every new drug that's been tried to treat dementia has failed. There's a 99.6% failure rate for new drugs in dementia.
Wow.
And while all of us can hope that we have a medical breakthrough there, we haven't seen it yet. And it's probably time to start thinking about dementia as something that we can control our own risk of by leading a healthier lifestyle, and in this case, training our brains.
And so many different forms of dementia as well. And what's a real stress, I guess, on the healthcare system is all of the baby boomers right now. You talked about, those who are aging rapidly, so that would be a real stretch on the healthcare system. Now, what about short and long-term memory loss? Is it the study held both, or is it one more than the other?
Yeah, so, a couple quick thoughts on that. So, all of us, as we get older, we start to slow down and our memory is not quite as good. And maybe one of the most important things to say to you and your viewers is, hey, that's not a sign of incipient dementia, right? Just because you're slowing down a bit and maybe couldn't quite, something was a little bit easier when you And you don't need to panic and go to your doctor and say, I have dementia. What's going on with me? All of us slow down and change a little bit. What dementia really is when that change becomes significantly faster, right? We sort of almost fall off a cliff, and it impacts our abilities to live our everyday life. And that's really the kind of change we're talking about here. And, what we've seen, not just in this study, but in a number of studies, is that if we build the right kind of brain training exercise, and again, not everything, not a brain game, not a video video game, not crossword puzzles, not Sudoku. But if we build an exercise that's designed to really rewire the brain, change the way information flows through the brain, then we can strengthen the brain, as a biological organ, one might say. In the same way that you can have a healthier liver or healthier muscles, you can have a biologically healthier brain. And that kind of resilience, or cognitive reserve, as scientists call it, is probably what's helping these people resist the effects of dementia.
So how was the study conducted, and what did the patients have to go through some of the speed training?
Yeah, so being in the study was a lot of work, and we all owe a debt of gratitude to the people who agreed to be part of it. So when a person enrolled, they go through a long set of baseline cognitive tests. So for every single person, we know exactly where they were when they started the study. And then each person who gets in a training group did about 10 hours of training over the course of 2 months. They actually went to a classroom twice a week and did their training, memory, reasoning, or speed, in a classroom twice a week for about an hour each time for about 2 months. And then that was it. And then half of them who finished that got randomized, so they did some booster training. So a bit of extra training at the end of the first year and the third year. Kind of like if you get a vaccination, right? You might get a booster shot to make sure the vaccine is really setting in. And then they took those cognitive assessments, those brain assessments, at the end of the first year, the second year, the third, the fifth, and then finally the 10th. So the researchers could get a very clear idea over time, hey, what's happening to the cognitive health of these people? And that's what made this study so powerful, because it takes a long time for a condition like dementia to emerge. We really have to follow these people over time for a long time. So it's a sort of wonderful and unique data set as a result of the contributions of those scientists and those participants.
So some people may have trained more than others. How do we know whether those people actually got more benefit and were not just inclined to train more because they were already in better cognitive shape?
That's a great question. And, the first answer is that they were randomized. So people who were assigned to, let's say, speed training, if they finished the first round of 10 hours of speed training, they were randomized and to either do more training or not. And so we can specifically compare the ones who did more to the ones who didn't to ask the question of who benefited more. And then second of all, we can look at their characteristics. We can look at people who did, let's say, the full 18 hours of training versus just the 10, and we can compare those to drop out. And we can say, hey, was there something different about them that sort of made them look like they were more cognitively resilient at baseline? And the answer is, at least as far as all the data that the researchers have in hand, no. There's no reason to think that that the folks who did the extra training were healthier at baseline or had better cognitive function at baseline. Nonetheless, for a scientist, we always want to do more studies. You'll never meet a scientist who says, well, this issue's closed, right? We can all retire and go home. And there's a lot of interest, and from us as well, into really getting into dosing. We would love to start to understand, well, is 10 hours as good as 20 hours? Is 40 hours as good as 10 hours? Should we do it once a year? Should we do it twice a year? Should we do it every year for 5 years? All these questions still remain to be worked out. But now that we have the baseline insight that this kind of brain training protects against the onset of dementia, we can explore all of these questions further over time.
So how significant is the 29% risk reduction? Do you expect that a majority of doctors will be encouraging seniors to go through some of this brain training?
Yeah, it's a big change. So one way to look at it is to say, well, how many extra years of brain health does that give me? And if it's a 29% risk reduction, and actually in the highest group, the group that did the full 18 hours across the 3 years, they actually saw a change of more like 48%. Wow. And those kinds of numbers are equivalent to pushing off dementia by about 5 years. And that's a pretty big change. The Alzheimer's Association has actually done a bunch of modeling to ask the question, well, what if we could push dementia off by 5 years? And you're talking about eliminating dementia for millions of people, and you're talking about saving hundreds of billions of dollars. And what do we all want? If you ask people what they want, nobody says, I want a long, slow cognitive decline into dementia. Everyone says, I want to be as sharp as a tack. And then, hey, one day, it's time for me to go, right? None of us are going to live forever, but how does everyone want to go out? I want to fall off a cliff. I want to be hit by a bus. I just want to. And so those 5 extra years of cognitive health, what it means is a person can be sharp and happy throughout their natural lifespan in that way.
I was also going to ask about the social aspect of attending classes in the study. How important was that?
Well, we don't know because everyone attended classes.
Oh.
We know that the social aspect alone doesn't do it. Because we only saw, and again, when I say we, I should be very clear, I'm referring to the active study investigators themselves. But they only saw the dementia risk reduction in the speed training group, even though all three groups had social contact. So the memory training group, the reasoning training group, and the speed training group, they all came into class, they all made friends, they all talked to their instructors and so forth. But the speed training effects were, the dementia risk reduction effects were unique to speed training. As a scientist, if you ask me what do I think's going on, I think absolutely that classrooms and social contact help people achieve their wellness goals. And you can look at anything. You can look at weight reduction, you can look at smoking cessation, you can look at healthy eating for diabetes. All of those things are easier to do in a group environment than completely on your own. And I think that's how the social aspect helped. It didn't change what the speed training did, but it helped more people complete more speed training. Does that make sense?
Henry, I'm glad you brought that up. How much does physical exercise and diet impact dementia?
Well, more and more data is coming in on this front. We know, for example, that people who adhere to a Mediterranean diet, for example, or certain kinds of modified Mediterranean diets where they're eating, more fish, more olive oil, more berries, we know that those people experience better cognitive health and dementia resistance. We know the same thing for physical exercise. People who get regular aerobic exercise or even strength training seem to have longer, more cognitively healthy lives and resist dementia. What we don't know yet is what is cause and what is effect. So maybe people who eat healthier for some other reason also have healthier brains. If you're the kind of person who eats healthy, maybe there's some other activity you do that keeps your brain healthy. And this is a very difficult thing to unpack because it's very difficult to ask someone to change their diet for, let's say, 2 or 3 years to see what the effect is on their dementia. Nonetheless, from my perspective as a scientist, I think the evidence is good enough from diet and physical exercise, and now the brain training exercise evidence, that we should be thinking as a society around how can we build dementia risk reduction programs? How could we have community centers, churches, and libraries offering classes where people could come and get advice around how to eat and get advice around how to build an exercise program and help them complete their brain training? So at the population level, we could kind of add all those effects of nutrition and exercise and brain training together to reduce the risk of this dread disease. And interestingly, we kind of know how to do this. We have a model from diabetes. If you're at risk for going on to type 2 diabetes, you can take a evidence-based class called the Diabetes Prevention Program, and they'll teach you how to eat better and lose weight, and it'll lower your risk of diabetes, and it will save the government money. And we should really start to think about dementia that way as well, something that we can work to lower our risk of. Now, can any one person be absolutely certain that they'll never get dementia if they do this? No, that's not the way science works. But if we can change the overall risk profile for lots of people, well, we can have a better, more vibrant society without a doubt.
So what do you say to somebody then, Henry, that says, you know what, I've got it in my family, it's hereditary, I'm getting dementia, I'm just going to deal with it, so forget about your study? What do you say to somebody like that that maybe says, I don't have a hope?
I think everyone has hope if they take the right actions to bring their health into their own hands. If I were talking to an obese person who sat on the sofa and watched television 6 hours a day and said, for sure, I'm going to get diabetes and a heart attack, there's nothing I can do, I'd say, hey, of course there are things you can do. Let's get off the couch. Let's eat a little bit better. Let's take this step by step. If I was talking to someone who had family history of dementia, who was already starting to experience some slowing and starting to say, hey, this is hopeless, I would say no, absolutely. Just like anyone can lose weight, anyone can become physically healthier, absolutely anyone can improve their brain health. Now, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink, they say. There's always going to be some people who want to manage their health actively and some pay, and people they don't, and some people who don't. But that's a cultural change, I think, that will happen over time. Kind of like physical fitness, right? I work in downtown San Francisco, and 50 years ago, if I had looked out the window and seen someone running downtown San Francisco in sneakers and short pants, we all would have thought he had escaped from the loony bin, right?
Or running from the police, maybe. No, I'm sorry.
Running from the police, exactly. But now we recognize, hey, that's a common activity. He's out for a run because he wants to take care of his physical health. And I think that over the next few years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we're going to see people engaging in structured brain health programs, just the way they engage in structured physical health programs. And that will seem first normal, and then it will seem weird if you don't do that. So step by step, we're going to see that.
So what about at home then, Henry? What kind of games can we engage our brains in to help offset dementia? Crossword puzzles, do they help at all? Are they helpful?
Well, the reason I ended up knowing so much about the study, the active study, is that I work at a company, Posit Science, and a number of years ago, when the first good results started to come in from the active study, we worked with the scientists who had invented speed training, and we helped them update it for the modern age, put it on the web, put it on your phone and your iPad. And so anyone who wants to come try this speed training and see what it's like, they can come to Brain HQ. Don't mean to shill on your show, but if anyone is curious, they can come and register. And it's free to register. You can try an exercise a day and see if you like it. So I think one of the exciting things about this active study news is anyone who wants to do this can come do it now. It's not something we figured out in mice that might help us 20 years from now. It's not a new drug that has to be further tested. Maybe 10 years will help us. The future's here right now. So in that sense, people can, in many cases, do a program like this at a local library or a community center, or do it in their own home. So that's exciting that this kind of science is literally delivered through computer, much like you and I are talking to right now. We can actually rewire our brains in the same way.
So what physically happens with the brain then as a result of speed training? Can you describe that in layman's terms?
That's a great question. So, the brain is made up of literally billions of cells called neurons that connect to each other. And every cell in your brain connects to about 1,000 other cells. And those connections, well, they actually determine who you are. They determine how you see and how you pay attention and how you think. And one of the most amazing things about the brain is that there's not enough genetic code to specify how your brain should wire together. Your genes literally can't encode that much information. So what happens is the brain builds itself from well before you're born, but certainly through childhood. And one of the most amazing neuroscientific discoveries of the past 30 years is the brain continues to build itself even as we're adults and even as we get older. Many people think the brain is like a computer chip inside their head. They think it's hardwired, right? And so once it starts to go bad, well, nothing you can do about it. But we no longer believe that as scientists. We know that the brain is constantly rewiring and remodeling itself. So what this kind of computerized speed training does, or the exercises in Brain HQ do, is that they actually ask your brain to go faster and be more accurate. They literally rewire the connections in your brain so that information flows through your brain more quickly and more accurately. And in doing so, it's sort of like moving from a noisy, blurry Skype connection to a clear, crisp Skype connection. The information gets through better. You can hear it better. You can see it better. You can remember it better. At the same time, we also know from experiments in animal models that it literally changes the health of the brain. We can see changes in how many different types of neurons there are. We can see changes in the level of insulation between neurons, and in that sense, the brain is becoming, again, healthier as an organ in the same way that your body would become healthier if you exercised.
Do we tap into other parts of the brain through a lot of these the speed testing?
Well,
like it's a muscle, you got to work the muscle, right, to keep it healthy.
yeah.
So
Yep.
we may be tapping into different regions of the brain that maybe we never did for the last 20 or 30 years.
Speed training certainly helps parts of the brain wire together more tightly than they would have been wired together otherwise. There have been brain imaging experiments that show that we improve connectivity through the use of speed training. The only reason you're seeing that little look in my mind is, often people ask me, they say, well, I hear I've only used 20% of my brain, or I hear 10% of my brain. Does it help bring the other 90% online? And I always, as a scientist, I have to call out that actually we use all of our brains all the time. The old 10% idea is kind of a myth that's a little bit pernicious, but we can do our best, you and me, with your audience, to stamp out that myth. Everyone's using all of their brain pretty much all their time. What changes is essentially is how quickly and accurately that brain is working as a system, how well it's conveying information, and how well it's connected all those different parts. And that we can change through this kind of training without a doubt.
Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Mahncke, CEO of Posit Science, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Hal. Thank you.